Okay, well, just search out that video online and find out the rest. Now,
Tiger is ambush.
No, I think the right ambush you need is to ambush corruption.
That's a thought.
You need to ambush corruption.
That's a thought.
You know, anyway, it kind of, segues into the next conversation about getting Nigeria from consumption to production. And there are several questions on that. Because depending on who you ask about Nigeria's trade balance, the answer is varied, as there are opinions or perceptions. In December, for instance, the 2023 report says from the NBS that Africa's biggest economy recorded a positive trade balance of 1.89 trillion naira for the fourth straight time in Q3. That's a 166.2% increase from 708.9 billion in the previous quarter. And that also improved from a deficit of 409.4 billion on a year-on-year basis. Now, all of these is talking about so many things. Now, the perception of corruption levels says that, now, from the perspective of consumption levels, it is not difficult to see why Nigeria is so poor and majority of our citizens in abject poverty. There are those who believe that it is evident that our economic woes cannot be ascribed to problems associated with excessive consumption. Underconsumption is a phenomenon Nigerians should actually worry about. What do all these mean? Let's have that conversation this morning with Professor Banjo Oyelaran-Oyeyinka, who is the author, who is an economist, by the way, and an author, the author From Consumption to Production, a book he published in 2016. Thanks for joining us this morning, Prof. Perhaps a good way to begin would be to even ask the question, how did we get here to the place where Nigeria is consuming more than it produced? Have we always been like this, pre-independence, into independence, and until now? How did we get here, Prof?
So, thank you very much, Alero. Thanks for inviting me. I like the historical context in which you have posed this question. Pre-independence, Nigeria was a major exporter of almost all the big commodities, oil, palm, groundnut, as we all know. And this is where most countries started, actually. They started from being, exporters, developing countries, exporters of these kinds of goods and, from the farms, because we all came from agrarian background. Post-independence, there were big plans by this country to become an industrial nation. Almost all the development plans had a huge investment plans to build steel plants, to build petrochemicals, just like the others in East and Southern Asia. Then came oil in the 70s, and we experienced the phenomenon called the Dutch disease. In simple terms, the Dutch disease is a situation where when a country discovers oil or minerals and begin to export that commodity, what happens is that the dollar accruing from that excess, revenues coming out of that commodity tends to escalate or to lead to the appreciation of their FX currency. So you have a situation where people are still very nostalgic up till now, where the naira was at par with the dollar. And remember, we were not America. We were not Europe. Our currency was at par with those economies simply because we were exporting crude oil. And we did this for a very long time. That's what the Dutch disease do to you. And you have a problem in two ways. One is it distorts policy. Policymakers take their eyes off what we call the tradable sectors, manufacturing and agriculture. rather than invest those money that we got into productive infrastructure to build bridges. We did some to build, all of those things that we did some, but they didn't work out. We continue on a profile of unsustainable consumption. And that's the second thing that the Dutch disease does to you. Your import profile becomes extremely, locked into imports of luxury goods. Even as at 2021, when you look at our import profile, and I'm trying to talk before or after COVID, you find that Nigeria, for example, exported crude oil of about $34 billion. And we imported finished products of 77.5 billion, according to OPEC. So in other words, you don't process what you require. You export what you produce, others process them, they create jobs in their country, and then they sell it back to you at 10, 20 times the price. Let me give you a very poignant example. In that year, 2021, China's export to the world was about $3.3 trillion. The total African export, all the 54 African countries, was 2.7 trillion. Just one country overshadowed every African country plus. And so you are in a situation where you are feeding others with raw materials and you simply are consuming their good. This is our descent into a consumption society. The second dimension is that because we didn't invest these monies into changing the profile of our rural areas, because this is what most countries do. Rural areas, as you know, don't have proper healthcare infrastructure. They don't have proper hospitals, schools. They don't have roads. So folks tend to migrate into the cities. In the old urbanization profile that we saw in Europe, I mean, many of us read Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. People come to cities into factories. They come to work because of the pull factor. The cities pull them to come to the cities to work in factories. In our own case, the rural area pushed us out, not pulled by the cities. We were pushed out by the rural environment because there was no life and there was no livelihood there, because we didn't invest enough to change the profile of our agriculture from being agrarian to a productive industrial agriculture. So you find cities in Africa have also become consumption cities, as I term them. And the bad part of it is that you cannot hide poverty. Slums begin to form at the peripheries of these cities. You have your Makoko, you have your Ikorodu slums, you have all of them all over the place by people who came out of the rural areas having no skill, having no education, and they come into the cities in the hope of getting jobs which didn't exist.
Okay.
So Prof, this is the consumption cities that we have created.
Okay. Prof, I listened with attention to your introduction about the monies we were making from exporting crude oil. You know, we just sat back and we were counting dollars. So is it these same people who are used to just sitting down and counting dollars that you want to go back to the farms now, where in their mind's eye, when they think about the farm, all they see is hoes and spades?
Yes, indeed. And I think this is, let me introduce another terminology, which is productivity, like you know. The difference between a rich country and a poor country is that singular word called productivity. In a particular Dutch farm, I'll give you an example. 1 hectare of land, you will get 20 tons of potatoes, 20 tons. In a typical African environment, you probably get one ton. In a typical, industrial farming environment, you probably get about 12 to 14 tons of maize. In a typical agrarian society, you get 1.2, 1.42. So this is the issue of productivity of the land, of the soil, of the people. Productivity also relates to human skills. You know, we are used to measuring those hard things. Like, you know, you can count houses built, you can count machinery, but that soft infrastructure, or that soft, what somebody call brain infrastructure, the human skills. I don't know whether you saw a video clip that's going around by Tim Cook, the head of Apple, where they were, you know, people were complaining about going to China to manufacture. And he was saying, we didn't go to China because of cheap labor. He said, people have taken their eyes off this history over the last several years. He said, China is no longer a place for cheap labor. He said, we go there because we have skills there. He said, those folks have skills because they have technical and vocational education. And he was giving an example of the USA. If you collect, you know, the number of, say, design engineers in the US, they'll fill a room. He said, if you collect them in China, they'll fill a whole football field. This is the difference. The number of people you have who are skillful, even on the farm, in the factories, and everything. Why is it that up till now, we can't even design a refinery by ourselves? After 50 years, how is it, for example, that we cannot even build roads without calling some foreigners to be road skills? That is where the difference is. Productivity.
So,
productivity.
Prof,
yes.
Following from that question, therefore, would be, so how do we get to the point where we are able to produce the kinds of figures that you mentioned? Was it 1 ton, you said, as opposed to 14 tons?
1 ton per hectare.
Per hectare, like other people are doing. How do we get that rolling in a country where to get bank loans, you have to pay about 25, 30% interest rates and all that?
Yeah. No, and this is, I must say that it hasn't been for lack of effort. I think there has been efforts made, but it's not nearly enough. Sometimes our efforts are too little, too late. We don't do it fast enough. What is happening is that the country is a huge country. We need a sense of emergency and urgency to do these things. I know, for example, the FDB has been very supportive in terms of productivity of the land. Basically, what you do, mechanization, the right variety of this particular commodity. Those are the things that define the seed, as I say. The seed is what defines, what you sow is what you reap, right? So if you sow a diseased seed, you probably get nothing out of it. If you sow a seed that is, susceptible to drought and pestilence, you come back after 6 months and you see nothing. But if you, for example, put in the ground a seed that is scientifically designed to have resistance to drought, to insects and all of that. And these are all what the science system should do. So what should we do? I think we should go back to the basics. I think we should start funding our research systems. We have not done that enough. When you talk to people in agricultural science in Nigeria, they tell you, all we get is salary. I supervised a PhD several years ago, and I was looking at NIFO and typical scientific research centers in Malaysia. The difference was just too mind-blowing. They have got to a point where they were using this same oil palm for all kinds of things, while we're still at a very rudimentary level. For example, cassava. Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava in the world. There's a figure that you can find on the internet that all we got, I think last year, from export of cassava was $1 million. $1 million. Because we simply just export the raw cassava. Thailand, which is one of our competitors, down like number 4, so got $1.3 billion. 1 million to 1.3 billion. Why is that? Thailand is not going to be exporting its cassava to you. They will take cassava. I get it that we eat gari, we eat fufu and all of that. But we have the land, we have the people. Nigeria is a huge country with huge potential. We have to make dedicated effort to also put cassava into the industrial value chain. From cassava, you can make starch. Starch is the base. You can make ethanol, you can make methanol, you can make sorbitol. There's a fantastic woman there in Oyo State who has almost single-handedly built a whole industrial structure for herself. She's producing sorbitol. By the way, sorbitol is a sweetener that you use in toothpaste and confectionaries. And someone was telling us that if you build 25 of these factories, it's not even enough. All we do is import the sorbitol. We still import starch, for God's sake. In 2024, we still import starch. Nigeria shouldn't be importing those things.
Okay, Prof.
So this is the thing we need to change.
Yes. This is sounding both challenging and exciting at the same time. I don't even know the words for it. In the wake of this the new federal government under the new president, one of the words that's making the rounds now is value addition. I remember that's part of the agenda, so to speak, of the federal government, value addition. Now, we also know that even though there is a federal Ministry of Agriculture, they don't have their own land. They have to talk to states. They have to collaborate with states. They have to assist, work with the states and all of those things. So how do you see all of that working well? We'll come to the initiative of your organization. Well, how do you see all of that collaboration happening? Perhaps even before we go there, what is the potential of Nigeria's productivity to sustaining itself as opposed to importing?
It's about intentionality. We just have to be intentional about it. This is not rocket science. You see, 1964 or so, that was when India achieved a green revolution. And that's, again, very far away. In this recent time, the bank has supported Ethiopia. I'm sure you have seen this news in the newspapers. The African Development Bank supported Ethiopia, starting with 5,000 hectares of wheat, new variety of wheat, which is heat resistant. And as I speak to you, this was, I think, around 2018. As of this year, Ethiopia is aiming to produce 2 million hectares of wheat, 2 million from 5,000 hectares. Ethiopia has become a net exporter of wheat. You must have heard Dr. Adesina say it in many of his speeches. It is not rocket science. We did the same with Sudan. Sudan has become a major country for producing seeds wheat. So it's about being intentional. It's about infusing a sense of urgency and saying enough is enough of poverty. So, like I said, it's not that people are not trying. We just need to do more.
I feel
we need to do it faster.
Yeah, Prof.
Faster and on a big scale.
I feel scandalized when you talk about the fact that Sudan is a net exporter of something. Sudan. I mean, knowing all that, the understanding that there's still a lot of wars, crisis, and all of that along that particular country. Now, speak to that collaboration, Prof. On the one hand, the declaration has been made by the president. In fact, he said that they have lined up certain hundreds of thousands of hectares of land for agriculture and all of that. Speak to that collaboration that needs to happen and the challenges that collaboration could have, as well as likely ways around.
Thank you. So I think it is actually happening now with some of the. So let's take the state, the government. And at the end of it is the private enterprise that must drive business. That is the way it is everywhere, How many people can government employ? So the role of the state, for example, is to create that ecosystem for businesses to work. The research institutions that produce the seeds, for example, you enable them, you finance them, you put investment in them, and you give them goals, clear KPIs. I want to have so-and-so thousands of tons of wheat seed. I want to have so-and-so cassava tons of this and this by September of 2024. So you set them goals, and then you now identify, of course, the critical actors in society, the big companies, the medium companies, the small farms. The small farms always need some level of coordination. So we give that. And I want to tell you also that, for example, the collaboration between the government and the states, at least some states now, as far as I know, has gone quite well. I know in Jigawa, for example, the wheat that we are supporting in Nigeria, the expectation that we're going to go almost 40,000 hectares this year and do more during the wet season. So that kind of collaboration is ongoing, and one has to commend the government for all the push, for all the, it has come late. It would have started last year, in fact, early next year, middle of last year, but the new government has pushed it off. So that kind of thing is what you want. The policy domain belongs to government. The enforcement of that policy must also belong to government. Government must say, we have a monitoring and evaluation. If you don't do 1, 2, 3, these are the incentives, but these are also the penalties. This is what has been done in other countries.
Okay.
They used to call it reciprocal control mechanisms in East Asia. The state will give you certain incentives and say, look, we don't have resources. You must export so and so and so level this year, next year. If you do more, we'll give you more. If you don't, we'll penalize you at this level and at this level. So I think it's all about incentives and penalties for default.
Okay.
And also to create the ecosystem to ensure that, but by the way also, in our case, because of the wide-scale insecurity, I believe that that's one of the areas that we must be intentional about. After all, households, they protect their own asset. You put people to protect your home, you put CCTV. So I think the assets that we have are the, factories, the farms. There must be an intentional identification of certain clusters in this country where the government will say, this is a no-go area. If you're a bandit, you come there, you get killed. I think we just need to get to that level.
Professor, we're talking about production generally now, farming and all that. Production also makes one think about producing things from factories, producing what we need, what we're going to eat, our food. Some multinationals have had reason to actually pack up and leave Nigeria. How are we going to replace those manufacturing concerns which have left Nigeria so that we can begin to produce those things which they were producing for us?
Yeah. No, I think this is it's a challenge and it's also an opportunity for our country. Folks on the face of it will say, oh, they are leaving because of the challenging effects domain and all of that. Many of the companies also leave for reasons best known to them. Some of them, their business model have changed. I know that 2 of them left at the same time they left Nigeria, they left Kenya, they left a couple of other countries. So it's not just about our challenges. We have our challenges in this country. And we know the most difficult part is electric power, for example. And I think it is a correct thing that this government is putting the focus on it, but it should be done in a very, very radical way. Anyone who's stands in front of this business should be held accountable. Nigeria cannot be talking about 5,000 megawatts of electricity in 2024. So that the first level, I believe that probably drove some of those companies away in those days was the lack of power, epileptic power. They were incurring too much money, and many of them were spending billions and billions on diesel. So we can mitigate that, and also by using other alternative fuels like compressed natural gas, LPGs. There are technologies now that allow you to run your car in all the three domains of society: transportation, homes, and factories. So factories government needs to provide an enabling environment for these factories to be able to run on cheaper fuel, even as we speak, while they also provide them the environment to ensure that we make the ease of doing business even easier. And this is the soft part of business that people complain about, that we have heard, that we have seen in writing. We need to make life easy for those who are production actors by making sure that all the things that create problems, customs is one of them. I met a young man who was telling me that he used to import a particular intermediate good of almost 17 containers. And one day they hit a wall with some custom officials. And they were asking them for 20 million naira. This fellow, anyway, it took them months and months, they resolved the problem. But I said, so how do you do it now? He said, oh no, I reduced the 17 container to one. I just try to now produce whatever I can produce here. Every country to produce, you need to import certain things, but not import finished goods. Those who import intermediate goods, for example, are doing their business in a correct way to a time when they can make everything right here. So we shouldn't also discourage those kinds of people.
Okay.
Who are making effort. He said they nearly killed me. I was paying interest in banks, and I got to a point and said, look, if these people are going to ruin my business, let me just reduce it to a minimum. So by now we're encouraging him, look, please, why don't you just find that factory here? So this is the second point, Alero, that we need the value chain that Ayo talked about. Value chain is about starting from the raw material right to the end of the chain. It is a chain. Value is a chain of activities right from the beginning, different actors, different locations, and ensuring that there is a smooth and harmonious way in which, say, you take cassava in the beginning, or you take cocoa from raw pod of cocoa until you get to chocolate. So along that chain, you have so many actors.
Okay. Now, Prof, on that, my apologies for butting in. On that, it's a chain, and it's understandable.
Yes.
However, you've also identified the challenge of corruption. How do we insulate these systems from corruption? As you said, it's a chain. If we're able to nip it at the beginning, can we be sure that we will not fall victim of this corruption in the chain before we get to the end? And even at the end, how do we ensure that what we started with is exactly what we have at the end? How do we insulate these value chain from corruption so that we can get the desired production value?
That belongs in the domain of government. And you can actually be intentional about it. Many years ago, when we went to train in India, this anecdote I'm telling you will answer that question. I met a very wise and old man who was in that factory. We went to train on the steel industry in India. And we were talking one day, and he was telling me, oh, Banjo, we are just because I kept always asking him all kinds of sociological questions. And he said to me, corruption is everywhere. He said in India, at that time, 3/4 of the legislators are they would be in jail if they were not in the house. He said, but we realized very early on that we have to insulate some things from this. In fact, he gave me a Hindi phrase, which roughly translates to, we know what not to touch. That was the meaning. I still remember up to today. He said, we know those sectors not to touch. And he reeled out about 5 of them. He said food, medicine, their nuclear program. He said, because if we don't get it right, one day our neighbors, I don't want to mention names, they're going to bomb us to hell. And then he mentioned their space program. He said, it is our ambition, we're a large country, one day to challenge the big powers. He said, so we know among ourselves, those ones that cannot be touched. And this is something that we should look at. In some countries, they call it an elite consensus. The elites have to agree and say that the food sector, the medicine sector, these types of factories, if we catch you doing your corruption there, you will suffer so and so and so. You cannot run without boundaries.
Okay.
So that's that was the lesson of that anecdote the man told me. He said, you have to put the boundaries, Okay. He said, you think we are not as corrupt, we are just as corrupt as you, but we know what we should not touch.
Okay. I think I'm going to come up with my own list. Number 1 should be education. Number 1 should be education, agriculture, technology, medicine, and we'll go to the National Assembly for the next one. So I have to thank you very much, Prof. There are a number of people who will be wondering all these things that this man is saying and that he wrote in his book, From Consumption to Production. Are they practicable in Nigeria? Well, that's a matter for another national seminar or national conference. But for now, we have to thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and perspective this morning. Hopefully, someone has been provoked to go into business altogether. Professor Banjo Oyelaran-Oyeyinka is Senior Special Advisor on Industrialization to the President of the Africa Development Bank. He's also author From Consumption to Production. Thank you so much for your time this morning. So,
thank you very much. Thank you, Ayo. Thank you, Ayo.
Yeah. So we're back in a moment to take on another issue somewhat related. We'll be right back.